The invisible
Why were
champion.
you two fighting?
There is a moment rare and strange when a high school hallway goes completely silent. Not the silence of an empty building at night, not the quiet of a library or a chapel. Something different, something that stops even the air from moving. This was that moment. The hallway of Westbrook High stretched out like a long exhale, lockers on both sides, scuffed linoleum underfoot, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look a little sick and a little tired. There were students everywhere. Backpacks, half-open sneakers, squeaking conversations bouncing off hard surfaces. The ordinary chaos of a Thursday morning in October in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. And then, nothing. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every footstep paused. Phones lowered. Eyes moved toward the center of the hallway, drawn there, the way eyes move toward something they cannot name but cannot look away from. A girl stood in the middle of it all. She was not tall, not imposing in any way a stranger might notice from a distance. Dark hair pulled back, a worn backpack hanging from one shoulder. Eyes that were steady in a way that very few 16-year-old eyes ever get to be. She stood still, not frozen, not afraid, still in the way that only people who have trained their bodies to obey them completely ever learn to stand. And on the floor, sitting with his back against a row of lockers, was Cole Hargrove, 17 years old, 6 feet. The kind of boy who had learned early that the world made room for people who demanded it. He sat with one hand pressed to his shoulder, not looking up, not at the crowd, not at her. His jaw was tight. His eyes pointed at the linoleum, the way a person looks when they are trying very hard to hold something in. Around them, students stood at a distance that felt like more than a few feet. It felt like a perimeter. Like something had happened in that hallway that nobody fully understood, but everybody knew instinctively and completely that they had just witnessed. The girl looked at Cole for a long moment. She did not gloat, did not look to the crowd for approval, did not straighten up with the posture of someone who had just won something. She looked at Cole the way you might look at a problem you had solved, not with triumph, but with a quiet resolution, like a door that had been closed. Then she adjusted the strap of her backpack and walked down the hallway, and the crowd parted for her without anyone deciding to do it. That was Thursday morning. This story begins 48 hours earlier. Part 1, the quiet one, Tuesday. Her name was Sloane Reeves. She stood on the sidewalk outside Westbrook High at 7:42 in the morning, looking at the building the way she had learned to look at every building that was about to become part of her life. Not with dread, not with excitement, with assessment, the way a chess player looks at a board before sitting down. Where are the exits? Where does the crowd move? Where is the light? Westbrook High was a 2-story brick building constructed in the 1970s and renovated just enough every decade or so to avoid looking completely abandoned. The gymnasium addition on the east side was newer, cleaner brick, different mortar, a small brass plaque beside the entrance that caught her eye for a moment before she moved on. The parking lot smelled like wet asphalt and exhaust from the line of school buses idling along the back fence. She had done this 5 times before. Stood on a sidewalk, read a building, walked inside, a new name on a class roster, a new locker combination, a new cafeteria with a different layout, different smells, a different set of invisible rules about where you sit and what that says about you. 5 schools in 4 years. She was 16 years old. People sometimes heard that number and assumed the worst. Trouble, instability, a family falling apart at the seams. Her mother worked in medical device logistics, which meant she worked remotely, which meant they could live anywhere, which meant that when things became necessary, they moved. Simple as that. Her mother had explained this to school administrators with careful patience every single time, and every time the administrator had nodded with the expression of someone who understood the words, but not what was underneath them. What was underneath them was this. Every school for approximately the first 4 to 6 weeks was manageable. Sloane was quiet. She did her work. She found a seat near the middle of most classrooms, not the front, which attracted attention from teachers, not the back, which attracted attention from everyone else. She ate lunch. She got her homework done. She was by every measurable standard an unremarkable student in the best possible sense of that word. And then inevitably someone would see something they were not supposed to see. A movement too fast, a balance too precise, fingers that placed objects down with a control that was not normal for a teenager. Or sometimes it was something smaller, the way she automatically shifted her weight when someone came up behind her, a pivot so smooth and so unconscious that it looked like she had simply decided to turn around, when in fact every nerve in her body had registered an approach from behind and responded before she finished deciding what to do. And then someone would look her up online. Sloane Reeves, age 14, World Youth Karate Championship Prague, gold medal under 60 kilogram division. Then again at 15, gold medal same division Seoul. Then again at 16, and this one had made it into the sports section of an Ohio newspaper. Small but there, gold medal under 60 kilogram division Monterrey, Mexico. 3 times. The Ohio article described her as a once-in-a-generation talent. Her coach at the time had said she was the most technically precise competitor he had worked with in 30 years. The Federation president had said something about her future in the sport that she had not let herself think about too much since then. Once people knew she stopped being a student, she became a subject. Teachers mentioned her in class unprompted when the topic of discipline or self-control came up. Students followed her to the parking lot asking for demonstrations. She had been asked at her 4th school to give a speech at an assembly. She had declined, which made things worse in a way that a public speech probably would not have. A boy at her 3rd school had shoved her from behind in the parking lot, apparently having decided that her refusal to demonstrate was evidence of fraud. She had caught herself before she fell. She had turned around slowly. She had looked at him. And he had taken 3 steps backward without understanding exactly why. She had not hit him. She had not needed to. But the look on his face, that combination of adrenaline and confusion and suddenly recalibrated understanding of exactly who he was standing next to, was the look she had been trying to avoid producing in people. It was the look that turned her into something other than a person. So they moved, and now it was Tuesday morning in Columbus, Ohio, and she was reading the building. The main office smelled like burnt coffee and toner. A woman behind the front desk handed her a printed schedule, a locker assignment, and a laminated map of the school that had been photocopied so many times the edges of the rooms were beginning to blur. Then a door opened, and a woman in her mid-40s stepped out. She introduced herself as the school counselor. She had the kind of face that had been trained professionally and over many years not to reveal what it was thinking. She shook Sloane's hand, asked a few questions about the transition, about whether Sloane needed anything, about how she could be helpful during the adjustment period. Sloane answered each question honestly and briefly. The counselor nodded at each answer with the expression of someone filing information away rather than simply receiving it. Before Sloane left, she noticed without meaning to, because noticing things without meaning to was the condition she lived in, that the counselor had a manila folder on her desk that she turned slightly so that the label was facing away from the door. Then the counselor said something quietly, almost to herself, not to Sloane, not to the room. Let her have this one. Sloane paused for just a half second. Then she adjusted her backpack and walked out into the hallway. She would think about those 5 words later. She would think about them on Wednesday night, lying in the dark trying to understand the shape of what was coming. And on Friday morning, standing in a corridor with a file in her hand, she would understand them completely. The hallway was exactly what she had expected, which was its own small comfort. Westbrook High in the first 10 minutes of a Tuesday morning was a system running on familiar patterns. Students moved in loose currents along the edges, thicker near the locker banks, thinner near classroom doors. Volume spiked near intersections and dropped near the administrative wing. The social geography made itself apparent within 40 seconds, not because it was labeled anywhere, but because human beings sort themselves by familiarity, and familiarity is visible to anyone who knows how to look. She found her locker, worked the combination. It stuck on the second number, which she adjusted for on her next try. She organized her books by period and placed her backpack in with a precision that had become, after enough years, entirely automatic. An outside observer might have noticed that her notebooks were arranged with their spines facing the same direction. She would not have been able to explain why, other than that things worked better when they were where they were supposed to be. She was closing the locker when she became aware of him, not through any dramatic mechanism. She simply became aware in the way her body collected information at the edges of conscious thought that someone was performing for an audience nearby, and that the performance was calibrated to fill space and establish hierarchy, and that she was about to walk through the field of it. Cole Hargrove was holding court at the intersection of the main hallway and the corridor that led toward the gymnasium. He was 17 with the build of a boy who had grown fast and learned to use the space that growth had given him. Not a bully in any cartoonish sense, nothing so simple. He was laughing at something or making something funny, she couldn't quite tell which. A group of students laughed along the way. People laugh when laughter is the social currency being spent. Two boys stood slightly behind him, and to the right, the geometry of support of borrowed proximity to something they found valuable. One of them, stocky, wearing a hoodie with the Westbrook football logo across the chest, leaned in and said something into Cole's ear with a directional glance attached to it, and Cole's eyes came up, found her, and a recognizable quality entered his expression. She had seen that quality before, the quality of someone who had identified with the automatic confidence of long practice, something they perceived as an easy mark. She kept walking. She angled her shoulder, found the gap in the crowd, and moved to walk around him. He stepped into her path. Not violently, not yet. Just a casual physical assertion of someone who had done this enough times that it no longer felt like a decision, a test, an invitation to react. She stopped, looked at him. He smiled. It was a good smile, she noticed, the kind that had probably worked on teachers and parents and anyone who wasn't paying attention to what lived behind it. A smile designed to make the recipient feel that the problem was their own failure to appreciate the situation. She looked at him for one more moment, then moved to go around him on the other side. He matched her movement. From behind her, the boy in the football hoodie, whose name she would learn later was Briggs, said something low that carried the acoustic signature of someone performing for an audience of two. Cole didn't look at Briggs. He kept his eyes on her. His smile stayed, which was its own kind of tell. She stopped again, waited. In her experience, this was the moment that almost always resolved itself. Most people, even people who had come this far, who had initiated this choreography, most people, when met with stillness instead of reaction, when denied the energy their escalation was feeding on, would redirect. Make it into a joke. Find a different audience. Drift away. Cole Hargrove looked at her stillness and decided it was something he could fill. His hand moved fast and sharp and knocked her books from the bottom. The impact sent them scattering across the floor, a clean, practiced motion, the kind that comes from having done the same thing enough times that it requires no thought. A small sound moved through the crowd nearby, the held breath kind that acknowledges something has crossed a line without committing to what happens next. Sloane looked at her books on the floor, crouched down, started picking them up. Not because she was afraid, not to signal submission, simply because the books needed to be picked up, and the most efficient path through this moment was not the one that escalated it. She had made this calculation in the time it took to recognize that escalation would require her to use things she had spent 10 years being taught were not for this, not for hallways, not for boys with borrowed confidence and something hollow behind their eyes. She was looking at the books when it happened. The backpack had hit the floor when she crouched. In the chaos of the crowd pressing in, phones rising, all attention pointed at her and at the scattered notebooks. Nobody was watching the backpack. And somewhere in the 18 seconds between it hitting the floor and her hand reaching for it again, Cole Hargrove crouched beside it under the cover of the crowd's noise and attention and took the one thing that had come loose from the inner pocket, a gold medal on a worn navy ribbon. He closed his hand around it and stood back up before anyone was looking at anything other than the new girl collecting her things. She did not see this happen. She would not know it had happened until after school. He would know from the moment his hand closed around it that he had found something worth keeping. She kept gathering her books. Cole's voice came from above and behind her, now louder, performing for a wider audience that had thickened without anyone deciding to stop and watch. She kept her head down, kept her hands moving. And then the kick came, not at her backpack, sharp and sudden, the way a person kicks something when they want the spectacle of the fall rather than the injury. The kind of kick that assumed the target would go forward, would lose balance, would provide the moment of collapse the whole performance had been building toward. The world shifted. Or more precisely, Sloane shifted. This was the thing people who had never trained at her level could not quite understand at a certain point. After enough repetitions, the body stops waiting for instructions. It perceives the input, the force, the angle, and responds before the thinking mind has finished its sentence. The response is not mindless. It is precise. It has been shaped by 10,000 hours of corrections and the patient, relentless work of learning to do one thing exactly right. Her foot planted. Her weight dropped and centered so that the kick found nothing to push against. Her body turned in a pivot so compact and fluid that most people watching would later disagree about exactly what they had seen. Some said she stepped to the side. Some said she spun. One student standing at the right angle would describe it as looking like water moving around stone, which was probably the most accurate account, even though he had no framework for why. Cole's force had been going somewhere. Now it had nowhere to go. He went with it. He hit the locker bank hard enough for the sound to carry down the entire hallway. Metal on back, the flat impact of a body that had expected resistance and found air instead. The hallway stopped. Every sound, every movement, every conversation stopped. Cole scrambled upright, and this was the moment she recognized before it fully arrived, the moment when pride takes the controls. When the audience size stops being a reason to de-escalate and becomes the reason it is no longer possible. His face was red, his eyes had changed. Whatever performance he had been giving was over, and what remained was simpler and older and more dangerous. He came at her again. His hand found her wrist. He grabbed it the way people grab things when they need to feel they have hold of something, when the world has just shown them they do not have hold of as much as they believed. And in the half second between his grip closing and what came next, Sloane Reeves made the hardest decision she had ever been asked to make on any mat in any country. The technique was already arriving, called for muscle memory, the way a word arrives on the tongue before you've decided to speak. The decision was not which technique. The decision was how far to take it. She had been trained to end situations. She chose instead to stop them. Her wrist turned inside his grip, not against the force, but with it slipping through the mechanical disadvantage of his hold. Her body moved behind him in one fluid step. Her hands found his arm and shoulder with a precision that was not cruel and was not accidental. It was architectural. She applied pressure to exactly the right angles, and Cole Hargrove found himself in a position his body recognized at a deep and inarguable level as a position from which he could not move. She held it for exactly long enough. Then she let go, stepped back. The hallway remained frozen. She could feel the phones, not see them, feel them. The raised arms, the small glowing rectangles. She had felt this in competition and had never found a way to make herself indifferent to it. Cole straightened slowly, his shoulder moved, testing something. His face had traveled through several rooms since this started and arrived somewhere harder to read. Not the red of a moment ago, something quieter and more complicated. She looked at him, he looked at her. Neither said anything for a moment, the kind of moment that has weight. Then she said quietly enough that people recording it would have to turn up their volume to hear, "Don't kick people." That was all. She turned and walked away. The cafeteria at Westbrook High organized itself along a logic she understood within 90 seconds of entering. Long tables in the center, smaller tables along the south windows, the serving line running along the east wall. Social stratification legible and consistent as it always was. Proximity to windows indicated status, proximity to walls indicated the opposite, and the round tables near the emergency exit were where you sat when you were new. She sat near the emergency exit. She was halfway through her lunch when the girl with glasses sat down across from her. Sloane had noticed her earlier in second period, writing in a small notebook with the focus of someone who was definitely not taking class notes. "You're Sloane," the girl said, not a question. "Yes?" "Marin," she set her tray down, looked at Sloane with the frank attention of someone who was professionally interested in accurate descriptions of things. "Everyone's been scared of Cole Hargrove for 2 years. Today you made him look like he slipped on ice. Sloan ate. People think you're a hero right now, Marin said. I want you to know that before you start believing it. Something about this was different from what Sloan had expected. She looked at Marin more carefully. That's not a compliment, Marin said, reading her correctly. When people decide someone is a hero, they stop looking at them like a person. That's already starting. I've been watching it happen for the last 40 minutes. Sloan looked across the cafeteria. She could feel the attention from a dozen different directions, the careful sideways kind that pretends not to be looking. I know, Sloan said. What you did, Marin said, pausing to find an accurate word rather than an impressive one, was real. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was real. I didn't stand up to him, Sloan said. I just stopped him from hurting someone. You stopped him from hurting you, Marin said. That's what I meant. Marin wrote something in her notebook. She did not offer to show Sloan what it said, and Sloan did not ask. At a table near the far wall, Cole's table, the one around which the school's social geometry had organized itself, Cole sat with Briggs and two other boys. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the surface of the table, and his right hand was doing something in his pocket, turning something over and over. She noticed this. She did not yet know what he was turning. She would. After the final bell, she took the long way to her locker. Let the crowd thin. Let the noise settle. Her locker stuck on the second number. She made the adjustment. She was zipping her backpack when she noticed it was lighter than it should have been. She went through the main compartment. Books, folder, charger, water bottle. She went through the front pocket. Pencil case, card holder. She unzipped the small interior pocket where she kept the things she did not need every day, but could not leave behind. The photograph from Prague was there, her mother on one side and her coach on the other, the medal around her neck, all three of them squinting into a low afternoon sun. The small folded letter from the Federation confirming her ranking, which she kept not out of vanity, but because it was easier than reconstructing the paperwork if she ever needed it. And the medal. The gold medal from Seoul, the second one. She kept it not because it was the most prestigious, but because the ribbon was worn in a specific spot. Her thumb had rubbed the edge of it through 2 years of competition nerves, which meant the fabric there was softer than the rest. She could find it in the dark by feel alone. The medal was not there. She stood at her open locker for a long moment. She thought back through the sequence. The backpack on the floor. The books. She had been looking at the books when she picked them up. She had not been watching the backpack. Cole had taken it. She understood this without anger, with the efficiency she used for everything quickly, without sentiment, trying to see the shape of the situation rather than only its surface. He had something now that he didn't yet know the full value of, but he had recognized it as hers, which meant he had recognized it as something she cared about, which meant that someone who had already decided to be bothered by her now had a tool. She closed her locker. She stood in the empty hallway for a moment, not because she was uncertain about what to do next, but because some things deserve a moment before you move past them. Then she shouldered her backpack and walked out. The building looked different on this reading. Same brick, same entrance, same plaque beside the gymnasium. But a building reads differently once you know something about what it contains and what it is willing to do with that knowledge. She walked home. The medal was gone. And 48 hours from now, a hallway full of students would stand in complete silence, watching a moment that neither she nor Cole had intended to create, and that neither of them would be able to put back in the box it had come from. But that was 48 hours away. Right now, it was just Tuesday, just Columbus, just a 16-year-old girl walking home with a lighter backpack than she'd left with, trying to stay invisible in a world that had already decided she was worth watching. Part 2. The Breaking Point. The video had 2,300 views by the time Cole Hargrove got home that evening. He knew this because Briggs had texted him the number at 3 separate points during the afternoon as if the count were a scoreboard, and Briggs wanted him to know he was losing. Cole had not responded to any of the texts. He had driven home the long way past the reservoir, the route he took when he needed 11 extra minutes to arrange his face into something that would satisfy the requirements of walking through his front door. The house was a 4-bedroom colonial on the west side of a development called Whispering Pines, which had no pines and made no sound particular to whispering. It had been furnished with the thoroughness of someone who wanted visitors to understand immediately upon entering that the people inside had done well. The furniture was heavy. The photographs on the walls were large and well framed. Many featured the same man at various points across 25 years, a younger version in a university football uniform, number 54, one shoulder pad, always slightly higher than the other. A middle version at business events, hand outstretched in a permanent handshake. And the current version, which was the version Cole shared a house with, broader across the shoulders than the university photographs. The jaw, heavier, the eyes the same. Warren Hargrove did not look up when Cole came in. He was sitting in the armchair that faced the television, and the television was off. Warren watched sports the way other people watch the news, as a continuous background condition of being alive and informed. The television being off meant Warren had turned it off deliberately, which meant he was waiting. Cole set his backpack down by the door. He had learned young not to let a bag hit the floor with any more sound than necessary. "Sit down," Warren said. Cole sat. Warren looked at him, not angry in any volcanic way. The look of a man performing a precise assessment of something that had disappointed him, the way a contractor looks at a wall framed incorrectly, not with emotion, but with the interest of someone calculating how much work the mistake is going to create. "I saw it," Warren said. "Twice. I watched it twice to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing." Outside, a car passed on the street. The sound came and went. "You went after a girl," Warren said, "in a school hallway in front of every phone in the building, and she put you on the floor twice." He paused, let the number sit. "You're a Hargrove. I've never had to tell you what that means. I shouldn't have to tell you now." He stood from the armchair with the ease of a man who kept himself in reasonable physical condition and considered this its own form of argument. "You figure out what you're going to do about it." He walked out of the room. The sound of the refrigerator opening and closing came from the kitchen. Then the television in there turned to something with crowd noise. Cole sat in the armchair that faced the off television. His hand was in his pocket. Had been since seventh period, when he'd first held the thing he'd taken from the floor of the hallway, taken in the seconds when everyone was watching her gather